Okay, that does not mean we should go back to what ancient people were doing. Okay, we now know this does not work. People used to sacrifice humans to the rain gods across the globe and hoping that it would bring the rains. We now know that does not work. Okay, so we do not do those things just because people in the past did it.
Okay, so a few points on this. First of all, I noticed that the angry bird didn't mention animal sacrifices. Some cultures did indeed sacrifice humans to appease their gods, and we can all agree, both Muslims and Christians, that it was an evil practice. But others, such as the Israelites, sacrificed animals and even vegetables and grain to appease God. Failure to perform these sacrifices could result in punishment. The logic is the same as in the evil pagan cultures, including those who practiced human sacrifice, though obviously for different reasons. And of course, there are animal sacrifices in Islam too, but here the meat is distributed among family and friends and the poor. God does not need the blood or meat of an animal. It is our piety and charity that pleases him.
While it is true that both the Old and New Testament have animal sacrifices in it, God tells us that the only thing that pleases him is through faith and obedience, and that God doesn't actually delight in the blood of animals.
But here's the most important point of this video. The Bible prophesies in Zechariah 14, 16 through 19, that in the future, all the nations will come to Jerusalem and worship God and keep the Feast of Booths, also known as the Feast of Tabernacles. This feast involved making animal sacrifices to God for 8 days, as mentioned in Numbers 29. But notice the threat in Zechariah 14. All the nations would be required to keep the Feast of Booths, and the Egyptians are especially singled out. If they didn't worship God and make the sacrifices, God would withhold the rain and send plagues as punishment. Again, it's the same logic as in every other culture in antiquity. Make sacrifices to the deity, or it will get angry and punish you.
So yes, Zechariah is a Bible prophecy, and they are told to worship God and to participate in the Feast of Booths. But one of the things that you left out is that in the Bible, for Jesus' death and resurrection, it was a one-time sacrifice where you didn't have to sacrifice anything anymore. So you no longer have to sacrifice animals because Jesus died on the cross and was the ultimate sacrifice. And even if I give the whole sacrifice thing to you, maybe sacrifice is needed. But yeah, it says in the Bible, in Romans, that spiritually we are the sacrifice. We are the sacrifice ourselves in obedience to God. So yeah, even if you throw in the whole sacrifice bit, it's a spiritual sense to sacrificing ourselves to God.
All the sacrifices that had been offered by the priests in the Old Testament were basically symbolic, and they were mere shadows of the full and perfect sacrifice that was to come and that would be offered once and for all. We don't repeat animal sacrifices in the Christian church today because everything that the animal sacrifice pointed to was fulfilled in the perfect sacrifice of Jesus. And Jesus not only was the person or the subject who offered the perfect sacrifice, but he was the object of his own sacrifice because he was sacrificing himself.
But there's another, even bigger issue here, and it reveals a major dilemma for Christianity. We will call this the Christian dilemma. There are two ways to interpret the prophecy in Zechariah 14. Either it is a prophecy about the future messianic age in which temple sacrifices will be made by Jews and Gentiles, or it was a prophecy that was to be fulfilled before the coming of Jesus in the 1st century CE. This presents a dilemma for Christians because either scenario disproves Christianity.
This is not a dilemma for Christians. As mentioned before, the Bible does not require animal sacrifices to be made in order to appease God. Furthermore, Jesus' sacrifice was a one-time thing, and it is not necessary to continue animal sacrifices. When you say that the Jews and Gentiles will come together to perform sacrifices, maybe it's just referring to the verse in Romans where it says that we are the living sacrifice, that we are to sacrifice ourselves to obedience to God, in which it doesn't actually contradict Christianity, because when it says that Jews and Gentiles will come together, it's talking about Jews and Gentiles coming together to all worship Jesus Christ. That actually complements Christianity because before Christianity, it was just the Jews that were following God. And now it's Jews and non-Jews. Gentiles are non-Jewish people.
The first scenario contradicts the central doctrine of Christianity, which is that Jesus replaced the temple sacrifices forever and did away with the festivals of the so-called Old Covenant. Why then would these sacrifices and festivals be brought back in the Messianic age?
Jesus' death and resurrection did not replace the temple forever. Rather, it fulfilled the purpose of the temple, which was to provide atonement for sins. Furthermore, Jesus did not do away with the festivals of the Old Covenant. Rather, he fulfilled them in a spiritual sense. In the New Covenant, we are still told to do sacrifices in a spiritual sense through our living bodies, through obedience to Jesus Christ.
So this, my friends, is the Christian dilemma.
Hate to break it to you, bud, but your dilemma isn't actually a dilemma at all, because I just refuted it.